Hi and welcome. Today I have another spread in my board book. It's one of the kids' books that's really fat, and I've prepped it by sanding it and then 2 coats of gesso. For this spread, I'm going to take some of Tim Holtz Idea-ology paper. It's double-sided paper, and he just had a new release of it, I think this year, 2025, but I believe it sold out pretty quick. Anyway, so I've taken one of those papers, it was a 12 by 12, and I'm spreading it out on both sides of the spread. I'm gluing it on with some of my glue, and I can use that because it's thicker paper. It's like cardstock, a lightweight cardstock. So I don't need to use a glue stick. It won't bubble. I've cut it a little bit larger than the board book pages, and I'll be trimming it once it's all on there. Now I like to leave the fold clear, just so that it will fold easy enough. You could add some distress ink so it wouldn't be so bright, and I might do that later, but and some people cover up that crease. I did have done that, but I just prefer to leave the crease open. I'm just taking my X-Acto knife and cutting off the excess. I've increased the speed of this because it's not any rocket science here. I have at least the top sides and the outside edges. There's a big enough remnant that I stick them into my paper strips bin so that I could pull those out if I need paper strips. I've tried cutting this with scissors, and sometimes I forget and get my scissors out and cut, but an X-Acto knife really does work better. Okay, so I have it glued and trimmed to size, and I'm ready to proceed. putting some scrap paper between the pages just so nothing gets on the previous page or the future page. I've got a lot of glazes sitting there. I only am going to use one, but I just hadn't decided what color I'm going to use. But before I do anything, I'm going to add a little bit of collage medium. I prefer to seal my paper if I'm doing a paper background. I don't always, but I prefer to seal it just so that anything that goes on it and I don't like it, I have a little bit of time to remove it. This is just the Tim Holtz matte collage medium, and then I use my oh gosh, I'm blanking on what that thing is called, my catalyst, just to kind of give it a nice even smooth, get any excess off. And I do let that dry. You can dry it with a dryer, or you can set it aside to dry. I'm taking a stencil. I have this one that kind of represents doilies, kind of looks like doilies. So I'm going to be using some opaque white texture paste. And remember, I've prepped this with some collage medium, so I'm not too concerned about going out of the pattern I want, and I can pretty much wipe it off if it goes out and I don't like it. Not sure if that was a kid screaming outside or a bird, but I don't hear any more. So just FYI, in a previous video I mentioned that my texture paste was getting pretty thick, and I added a couple spritz of water, and so this is my first time using it after that, and I have to say it did work some. It wasn't quite as stiff. It did spread a little bit easier, so I would recommend doing that if you have texture paste that is really getting hard to get out of the pot and hard to spread. So I'm adding one of these doily type patterns to each side. And I dump that right into a water bath. And there are some little spots there that did go outside of the pattern, and I do wipe them off a little later. I'm getting the edges right now, but the ones that are on the page, I do get some of those. Some of them you could hardly see and didn't bother me. So I'm gonna add a little bit of embossing, and I'm using tumbled glass. I'm using this stamp from Field Notes, and because it's a glaze, it lets through what's behind it, so really kind of is very subtle. You have to really be looking at the page to see it. And then I use my heat gun to emboss it. I decided to take a little piece of that, a little flower on that same stencil, and add to that open area, the upper left. And because it was so small, I just went ahead and taped it off. I usually have several pieces of tape stuck to a piece of wood that's real close to me, and so I can just pull it off and use it. Even doing that, I did get a little outside the edge, but I can wipe it right off. All the texture paste has got to dry, and I think that's what I do next. Okay, yep, so that's all dry. And I'm gonna add a couple stamps with this butterfly. I'm gonna use some Versamark, and I'm gonna stamp it, and then I'm going to use some white embossing powder. One's going to be a full butterfly, and one's just going to be like it's just flying onto the page. Now, what I don't show you, because it was kind of an afterthought, I think the page was all done, and the butterflies were, it's white embossing powder, so the butterflies were really, really white, where nothing else on the page is really, really white. The texture paste was white, but still it kind of looked aged on the page. So I did go back over the butterflies with some vintage photo, just a bit to soften the whiteness. I kind of wish I'd used a butterfly that wasn't quite so dense in the pattern, that had a little more open areas, but I'm actually not sure I have one. And again, I emboss it. And you can see how white it is there, and compare that to the final pictures, and you can see the difference. And I always seem to get embossing glaze or powder on my mat, and I cannot stand the feeling of that, so I have to wipe it off. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of collage, one down in the lower right and one up top on the left page. And the two pieces I'm using that look kind of like labels, they are digital downloads, and I stamp one with a number and the other I stamped with that butterfly. And that one, I think they're both from Field Notes. I'm also adding a little bit of vintage photo to the flowers, just to get rid of the white edge of the flowers, and the little branchy thing right there had some areas that were just were going to be too much of a pain to fussy cut out all of the inside of it. So I just opted to add some vintage photo to the inside, just to kind of cover up the white. I was going to use that butterfly that looks like it's landing on something, but it just ended up being too big. So I do go for a smaller black and white butterfly. I keep my tiny little butterflies in this little container. At least the ones I've already fussy cut out. So now I'm ready to start gluing. the butterfly, again, I only glue the center body portion of it so the wings can come away from the page. And then I trim anything that is beyond the page. And the last thing I'm going to do, I believe, yeah, I think it is. I'm just going to write a little quote here, and it says, "Live gently upon this earth." And I'm doing that with a fine point white Posca Paint Pen. And that is the last of it. Oh, no, I add a little bit of vintage photo around the edges. And I'm pretty sure that's the last of it. So I'll have some final pictures coming up, and you'll be able to see the butterflies after they've had some vintage photo on them. If you have not subscribed yet, I invite you to do that. I'd love to have you along for my art journey. And if you liked this piece, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. Either way, I hope you have an awesome day, and I'll see you next time.